Welcome to this panel on an update on Neuralink. It's kind of a follow-up for one we did last year. I did not know I was moderating until relatively recently, so I've got all my stuff together, but it's awkward because I'm both on the panel and moderating. So what I'm going to do is have us all do introductions. I'm going to give you the background of the science of it, and then I'm going to hit them up for their special abilities on all of the other aspects of it. I'll start the introduction and go down. My name is Jessica Cail. I am a PhD neuroscientist specializing in behavioral medicine. So I'm here for the science angle of what the implants are and what they do and how they're different from their competitors and FDA approval and things like that. And I'm also a science advisor for movies and television. I work a lot with Marvel. I helped design the Captain America serum that turns him into Captain America, what brain changes the Bruce Banner goes through when he turns into the Hulk. And they let me design the very disturbing artificial synthetic heroin on Iron Fist that was like the villain of that year.
So my name is Cory Rosenberger. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. I am an assistant district attorney. I work in the Conasauga Judicial Circuits, that is Whitfield and Murray County up near Chattanooga, in Georgia. I've been practicing law for a little over 10 years now. I did my first 3 years as an assistant public defender, and since then I've been an assistant district attorney. So I'm here to give kind of the legal aspect and implications of some of the things that Neuralink could potentially impact.
I'm John Padfield. I'm an engineer turned state representative turned business professor. But most relevant to this panel, during the time that I was working as an engineer, I worked as a quality manager for a global medical device company for 7 years. And have a good bit of experience interacting with the FDA on new product approval and post-market surveillance.
Good evening. My name is Phillip Pournelle. I spent 26 years in the Navy, surface warfare officer, driving different kinds of ships. Also, was 3 times here in the Pentagon, 3 different tours there. One of which was at a place called the Office of Net Assessment, whose task was to diagnose the future security environment, 20, 30 years in the future. And we got into a lot of these kinds of technologies during that discussion. I'm also an aspiring science fiction author. This is my father's last book. I helped finish it. And then I also have a book, a story here in Robo Soldier, Thank You for Your Servos. Great dad joke title. There's a lot of great stories in there about artificial intelligence and warfare. And then there's my story about cool. So my commentary here is mostly about what potential future impacts to society these technologies might have.
So let's start a little bit about the neuroscience, and then I will back off and ask them questions. So basically what Neuralink is when you want to move a body part, there's a movement part of your brain, the movement cortex, motor cortex, which sends impulses out down your spinal cord and out your arms or legs. Well, if I want to move this finger, there's a message coming from my brain, lighting up a part of my brain that's responsible for signals to my finger, and it sends an impulse out, goes down my spinal cord, goes out my arm, and tells that part to move. If you've lost the functioning of that, anything from your spinal cord, like if the bridge is out and the messages aren't getting to your arm, then you're not able to move. What they've decided to do is bypass all of that neurology, which could get damaged or has been damaged, either with people with quadriplegia because of a spinal cord injury or people with ALS that have neurodegenerative issues, is that they do a computer implant, and basically Wi-Fi connects to, or Bluetooth connects to a limb, and it's implanting into the part of your brain that you would use to activate that anyway. So if I want to move a robotic arm for that finger, all I have to do is imagining I'm moving my finger, just like I did when I have a real finger. They can't move their own, but the robot's finger moves. So they implant it as close to the original locations as they would for an arm or a hand or a finger, so that you really don't have to think about it. If you want to move, when I want to pick up my hand, I do it. I don't really have to think how I make it happen. They just think about their hand moving, and the robot's hand moves in the same way. So it needs to be implanted in the cortex there. The procedure for Neuralink technically is a set of 3 different things. I've reached the age where I need glasses, sorry. That it's a combination of the probes that they input into your brain, because normally your brain is communicating through these neurons out to the paths out to your body. Instead, there are little electrodes inserted in there, and this little neuron's devoted to this finger, and this little neuron's devoted to that finger. And but they've got implants, electrodes going to those neurons. So the neurons just fire as if they would if it was going to your finger, but it's going to a robot. The Neuralink consists of those probes, biocompatible probes, gold or platinum or something like that. The robot that implants them in exactly the right spot. This is the spot for the index finger. This is the spot for the ring finger. This spot for the middle finger. And then the electronic system that receives all those signals, because it's Bluetooth coming from your neurons. It's not a language that it's not spitting out in Mac OS, and it's not spitting out in in PC. It's not spitting out in any of those. It's spitting out, and it's got to be able to interpret it. So it's the electronic system that does that. The early probes had like 1,000, like 1,500 wires going into exact targets in the brain. It's not a one-to-one neuron to electrode, but it's at least a group of neurons. So that's kind of like resolution. If you think about your television, you've got all these little dots, and it's how many dots per inch is your resolution. Imagine how many electrodes per square area of your brain. It will give you better resolution. It's the difference between your finger going like, and your finger having the control to do interesting things with it, because you can activate just certain muscles and not others. So yeah, Neuralink has a investigational device exemption from the FDA to do these research studies, but they are not fully FDA approved. There is a company out there that is FDA approved, and how did they jump ahead of the line and ahead of Neuralink? It's called a stentrode. A stent is something if you've got a blood clot in your brain, or you've had a stroke or a collapsed artery or something like that, they can go in through your leg, up through the major arteries, feed that up into your brain, and then like inflate a balloon or something to open up your passages so that you don't have a constriction and a stroke. Because this other company tapped onto that, it's an established procedure, rather than do what Neuralink does, which is open up the brain and actually insert those electrodes in and then cover everything up and leave that connecting Wi-Fi to the robot limbs or the computer interface. The stentrode goes up through the vein in your leg. They only need to do a tiny little incision. They don't need to cut you open. They don't need to do brain surgery. They put it in through your leg and they feed it up through the artery, just like they would if you were having a balloon angioplasty or a stroke to open up a passage. And they insert an electrode up there in that same part of the brain, but on the inside of the veins of the arteries. And it can still receive signals from the electrical impulses from you wanting to move, but it never had to go into the brain. It just fed up through, it's adjacent to the brain in there. And they get approval because all that stuff's proven to work. There's no upsides and no downsides to them. So what are the downsides of the Neuralink stuff? Well, the brain is still a living tissue, and when they put these electrodes in, it's going to be in very precise areas. This area for this finger, and this area for this finger, and the arm, and the elbow, and they put them in exact areas. The brain can retract. In fact, that first patient, his brain shrunk away from those electrodes 4 times more than they thought even possible. And so that means the connections aren't made well. Some of them shrunk away, and you're losing resolution. It's almost like having a pixel out on your television. This pixel doesn't work. This pixel doesn't work. It's not receiving signals. You can still move the hand, but it's not going to be with the resolution that you had before. So that retraction of electrodes is one of the big problems with Neuralink. And the other criticism has been that they practiced a lot on primates before they did this in humans. And there was a lot of talk about recklessly doing surgery on primates and just sort of letting them, they might suffer, they might have gotten infections, and something like, I have the number here. Yeah, only 3 of the original 8 founding scientists are still there. Most of them have resigned because they didn't like the way things are going. So those are the cons. What are the upsides? Those people with quadriplegic, limbs or ALS, where they're losing their ability to move things, are able to play video games. One of them was an inventor, and they hooked up his interface with a 3D printer, and he was able to design in CAD and 3D print cool stuff. He was able to keep designing. Yeah, it's pretty amazing and life-changing and stuff. And the question here at this panel is going to be, what are the upsides, what are the downsides, and does then justify the means, and where can we go with this? All right, so that is my quick neuroscience background of this. Maybe we could start from here and start with the legal aspects with Cory. Sorry to put you on the spot, you have to follow a neuroscientist again. I want to ask you about consent. Like, one of the hallmark things about consent, if you're a patient that's going to sign a consent form for a medical procedure, is that you have to give it freely and not overly incentivized. But if you are a quadriplegic individual and this is the only game in town, would you consider that over incentivization? And is that fair consent?
So the law kind of recognizes this. It's a concept. Has anybody heard of a contract of adhesion? Anybody's heard that term? So a contract of adhesion is sort of when one side just has all the cards, and that's what you kind of see in this case. They're offering a product that will change these people's lives. It's going to be hard to say no, no matter what the terms and conditions are. People are so much more likely to say, yeah, just tell me where to sign. And the government and courts recognize that these contract of adhesions are inherently one-sided and inherently dangerous, because yes, if I'm a quadriplegic, I'm being given the opportunity to have some sort of freedom that I didn't have before. Yes, I'm willing to sign away my rights for that, and the courts have really recognized that. And I don't think that if Neuralink gets too abusive or too aggressive, I guess, with their agreements and with their contracts, that I don't think that those would be upheld, because this is just too vulnerable of a group of people to be able to knowingly and voluntarily say, yes, I understand the rights. I'm willing to accept those
risks.
Yeah. And so that's one thing I think to really look out for.
John, because you're a business tech expert and you have experience with quality management and medical technology, I was wondering, does the tech motto of move fast and break things, how does that apply if the break things is a person's brain?
It really shouldn't. The tech motto works fine when you're doing something like a website or an app and it crashes and people get upset, and then you push an update and things are fine again. When you're dealing with medical devices, and in particular implantable medical devices, now that is the highest level. You think about something like a pacemaker or an insulin pump. It has already been proven that those can be hacked. In fact, there's a term for it called medjacking, and it's medical device hijacking. And this has been demonstrated as early as 2011 at a black hat hacking conference. A security researcher demonstrated that he could take a pacemaker and make it administer lethal shocks to the person that had it. Same thing with an insulin pump. He could sit there and he could cause the insulin pump to inject that person with insulin over and over again. Now, obviously, he wasn't doing it on a live person, but he was demonstrating that he could hack wirelessly the medical devices. So there are some real precautions that need to be put in place here. I'll tell you, this is probably the technology I have the most mixed emotions about. I'm not completely against it. I'm not completely for it. There's tremendous upside, but there's some serious downsides to it as well.
From a neuroscience edge to that is that if somebody hacked the implant for a Neuralink movement pathway, you might be able to move a robotic arm, you might be able to operate a cursor or a speech device. But what about when we get to the point where we're doing implants for people's Parkinson's disease, for example? Like you have pacemakers to keep your heart going or to keep it in a normal rhythm if you have heart problems. Hacking that is terrifying. But if you have, for example, Parkinson's is too little dopamine in a part of the brain that helps with movement. That part of the brain is also reward and can also jack up other things like, pleasure and other things that it could jack up. So how could you change somebody's behavior if you hacked a bigger system like that? Raw movement is one thing. You might get a person, you could kind of puppet them, but how much damage would you do that as opposed to being able to hack into their, maybe for somebody with Alzheimer's, their acetylcholine, where you hack into their aggression and you just make them sort of a berserker, or you make them feel extreme pleasure in certain situations and then you just sort of guide them to do certain behaviors. Like those are very terrifying behaviors. Hold on. That one. Oh, shut up. Okay, so we will definitely come back to actually, no, I want to ask you a follow-up question on that. So in terms of quality management, like what does that look like in a normal company? And is Neuralink doing those things that you would expect to see done in that?
Neuralink right now is still in clinical trials. We know that they have at least 7 human subjects that have had the implant. Now their goal is to do 20 to 30 by the end of this calendar year. So they are in the clinical trial stage. What makes clinical trials so difficult on something like Neuralink? If I came up with a new drug that's going to treat Parkinson's disease or anything else, that is so much easier to monitor the effectiveness of the drug because you give it to a group of people and then you monitor them. But something like a medical device, especially something that has to be implanted in the brain, if you implant it and it doesn't work, is that because the device was defective or it wasn't implanted properly? And so you get into this interaction, it just makes the clinical trials much more challenging. To the best of my ability to determine, Neuralink is going through all of the right steps. They are taking the precautions. And what they're doing right now in terms of trying to restore functionality to people, a person who has a neurological disorder and they're helping the blind to see, they're helping someone that is immobile to become mobile. I don't know how anyone could be opposed to that. Where my real reservations are is what I know comes next. If you look at the history of pharmaceuticals, stimulants have a purpose. But stimulants can also be abused because they can give you a competitive advantage in some physical activities. Beta blockers for somebody that's into archery, or somebody that maybe is a musician, they have a little bit of a hand jitter, take some beta blockers and it can smooth you out. The point is, we are very accustomed to seeing pharmaceuticals used for off-label purposes to gain an advantage. And I know as Neuralink matures, we are quickly going to approach that point where Neuralink starts becoming a competitive advantage. In the future, are we going to see employers that prefer hiring people with Neuralink over people that don't have Neuralink? That leads into a whole other discussion.
Mm-hmm. With Phillip, you mentioned in an earlier conversation that we were having that, like we've seen what cell phones do to society and how that's kind of changed the way we are. Like what happens when you can't turn off your phone because it's hardwired into your brain?
Yeah, I mean, that's a serious issue. We can see today with cell phones. People get dopamine hits from the social media correspondence or others with the video games that are on the phone, and the phone is like almost surgically attached to their hand. But I say that flippantly, but in that case, you can actually turn it off. You can put it in the other room, or at least on the bedside, and not pick it up, right? But if it's implanted in your brain, the temptation to pick up the phone, to turn, is like immediate. And this gets towards Larry Newman's wirehead circumstances, in which you already mentioned that these electrodes could potentially go directly to the pleasure center of the brain. And you were talking about just like manipulating someone using that, but even just before that, just someone becoming addicted to that either the dopamine hit or directly for the pleasure center of the brain, and now you have these wireheads that are they're just going to check out, right? There's nothing else to live for other than just be in this constant state of pleasure and other circumstances. And for the moment, we're talking about improving the quality of life of people who have been harmed. And I agree that you want to help those folks and help their quality of life. I certainly hope, but I know too much about humanity to begin to think that we will stop there, that we will go beyond into these other realms. But just focusing on the patient for quality of life for the moment, because I know we'll pick up the rest later. There are the social and legal issues about the data coming out from the patients. They implanted these systems to get that quality of life. I certainly hope there's HIPAA elements to it, but because it's Wi-Fi or Bluetooth enabled, sniffers and other techniques to come in and collect that data surreptitiously immediately pops to mind. What's even more troubling for me is, as I read further afield, that the closeness of thought and reading or reading and language preparation in your brain to your thoughts, the sections of the brain that do that are very similar to each other. And so if we move in the direction of trying to enable communication for people who've lost that communication, and then in nature go beyond that, now you have the mechanism to manipulate, to send thoughts, or at least receive the thoughts of a person. And this group is usually about privacy, right? That's the ultimate invasion of privacy, that you can actually read or manipulate someone's thoughts directly. That's rather terrifying to me.
Imagine that software that's interpreting the brain signals that are coming out is proprietary. Imagine you are now, 2 years into Neuralink, and you can finally move things and watch TV and communicate with assistive devices, and then they make that a pay service. And if they do offer you a discount, is it, well, if you will sell the privacy of your thoughts, we'll give you a discount on the the monthly membership to this service that moves these limbs for you, this software package. But as long as we get to know that, he likes brunettes because his dopamine spikes whenever he sees a brunette on an ad, we're going to target ads directly into his brain that are featuring brunettes and something, or, just imagine what they could do with all that information. You think your clicks are personal? About your thoughts.
And it reminds me also of Anne McCaffrey's The Ship Is Sailing, right? The opportunity to then not just move limbs or things like that, but you are operating heavy machinery with your thoughts, or in Ship Is Sailing, you're operating a starship, with your thoughts and other great opportunities. But then, as you say, the people who gave you that ability can take it away.
Can take it away. And intrusive thoughts, imagine how terrible that would be if your intrusive thoughts actually made things happen. Think about that for a second. Yeah, I know, I hear a lot of groans in the room. Let's go back to Cory for a minute. What concerns do you see, since we're talking about civil rights and ethics and stuff, but for future use of this, what do you see legally?
So especially if this technology gets to the point where I can look at something and it is recorded how much I like that thing. That is, well, let me back up for a second. Fourth Amendment is the right against unreasonable searches and seizures. Anything where you have a reasonable expectation of privacy requires a search warrant or consent. And what has more privacy than your own thoughts? That would be one of, if not the most private thing that we have as individuals is our thoughts, what we like, and we as a society would need to decide if that is something we ever want the government, even a search warrant. Probable cause is a very low standard. Generally, probable cause is just this person might have done this thing, and there's some evidence to support it. And is that enough to get into your thoughts? For reference, when smartphones first came out, and recently, blanket search warrants for cell phones are no longer enforceable. So this person, this person is suspected to have committed this crime. Criminals often use their cell phones in the furtherance of commission of crimes. We should be able to search his cell phones. And the court has said, no, you need to specifically give regions of that phone that relate to that crime. And I just can't see the jump from a cell phone to your own thoughts. But it's certainly going to be a very, very interesting argument if that happens.
Could you expand on that beyond just the government? I mean, the Fourth Amendment applies to government activity, but now corporations that are as big or bigger than companies in terms of that privacy aspect.
Yeah.
I think that part.
I think that goes back to what I was talking about with the contract of adhesion. And you're talking about a very, very desperate group of people, people who can't use their limbs. And what would you be willing to give up to have more of a connection with society? And they'd be willing to give up a lot, their own thoughts, their most intimate thoughts, their most secret ideas. And that's something that we would really need to look out for.
If they did sign that consent that we talked about earlier, would that mean that those privacies were waived?
So again, with the contract of adhesion, the whole idea, imagine if there was one company that provided water to everybody, and they just overnight they changed the price of water from something reasonable to $100 a bottle. We all need water to survive. We all have to have water. That's kind of the idea behind a contract of adhesion. There are those safeguards in place that you can't jack up utility bills overnight. Quadruple, tenfold, whatever. And so that's kind of the same thing with the idea behind this is people would be desperate to be able to have access to the internet, have access to, prosthetic limbs.
Is that only for something that everybody needs? Because, Pharma Bro did that with I think it was the EpiPen or something, and were the protections there and he just got away with it? Or is that just because it's not something that everybody needs?
It's, I'd have to look at, I know what you're talking about, and I don't know if it was just because his company was making it, or if, something had, like a copyright or some sort of patent had expired. But generally those are protected.
But the legal mechanics of the adhesion is basically the government saying, we will not enforce this contract in those circumstances.
Yes.
But there are powers that a corporation has beyond just whether or not they execute a contract.
So there are certain rights. I like signing something saying you're waiving your rights. Is that what you're saying?
Well, when this is more of a query. I think I understand the principle of adhesion. My wife is the lawyer, not me. But basically, in those kinds of circumstances, it's basically the government saying, or the courts saying, we will not take any actions to enforce, we'll take no legal actions to enforce this contract. We're not going to assist you in enforcing a onerous contract, but there are powers that these companies have beyond just the legal realm of the contract itself. And so it's what powers does the government have beyond just hey, I'm not going to enforce this contract to deal with those onerous activities you described.
So there are certain rights that you cannot give up, even if you try. The first one that comes to mind is your right to due process, your right to be able to come to court. There are chuckles in the crowd, but in theory, you're not supposed to be able to give up your right to due process. You can't give up other rights. There are irrevocable, I guess you could say. Even if I try to sign away certain rights, then I can't. It happens a lot in law. A good example is something called accountability courts. When my circuit has something called a drug court, where someone with several, just can't quit using meth. That's the big one in Whitfield County. And so pretty much they control every aspect of your life. They dictate how much you're allowed to spend. They dictate where you live, who you can talk to, and slowly they give you those rights back. But one right that you can't give up is to say, I didn't do that. So if I say, well, you were around Dr. Cail, and you weren't supposed to be around, and he said, and one of the participants says, no, I wasn't around him or her, he always has a right to a hearing, even if you try to give up your right to due process. That was a very long analogy to say, I think that there probably should be some things that are not, that you're not allowed to sign away, even if you try to sign them away. And your thoughts might be one of those things. I think it probably should be.
I want to hit up John again. Will private companies always cut corners?
Yes.
That was a lot shorter than I thought it would be.
Here's a couple of
They're trying to do good for society, right? So you would think that there's some beneficial, there's some altruism somewhere in there.
I would encourage people to look up the lawsuit filed by some Chinese dissidents against Cisco. Cisco took existing software tweaked for the Chinese Communist Party to help them track down Uyghur Muslims. And when the dissidents escaped China and came to the United States, they filed a federal lawsuit against Cisco saying, you participated in the torture and execution of Uyghur Muslims by creating the software to help the Chinese government track them down.
And that was a condition of sale there, that we'll let you sell this software here if you help us.
They offered them money, and a client's a client, that's money.
Nothing like a dump truck full of money backing up.
So that case is still pending. That case is now about 12 years old. There's been delay after delay after delay on it, but that case has never been settled and it is still out there. So I am not optimistic about the ethics of companies protecting us from anything. I mean, anything. When I think about where can this technology go, there's the legal issues when we're dealing with US citizens. What about people that are renditioned off the street, held in a black site? How badly could you torture someone without any physical damage if you put a probe in their brain? We talked about the ability to stimulate the pleasure centers of the brain. There's a dark side to this too. There's other parts of the brain you could stimulate and permanently mess somebody up because of the treatment that they were subjected to that didn't leave a mark on the skin.
Anybody saw yeah.
There's also an aspect of not just corporate greed that should scare you even more. which is the people who want to do you good. C.S. Lewis said it best in that if someone's greedy, at some point they'll at least be satiated in their greed. But someone who wants to do you good, right, and reprogram your thoughts so that you will perform for the betterment of society. And we've seen this with in the past with Rockefeller or other people who first gained a whole bunch of money and then said, "I'm going to change the world for the better." And that those people cannot be satisfied, right? Their altruism in many ways is more horrific than just absolute greed, because greed can at some point be somewhat satiated, trying to perfect the world.
Well, since we're talking about implications and you've got the sci-fi, bona fides, then where can you imagine, ranging from super plausible-ish to full-on Black Mirror, or maybe they're both plausible-ish, where do you see this going?
Well, it does depend upon where the technology can what realistically where can the technology go? But if what I'm reading is correct, that if you can map to pleasure or pain centers of the brain, if the motor neural systems for speech is as adjacent to thoughts as what I've read, and therefore you can get it. We're already way into Black Mirror like capabilities. Now it's just a question of deployment, right? First you got to perfect it, and we'll perfect it on these folks that we're going to improve their quality of life for their own good, and then we're going to find folks that have neurodivergence, and we're going to perfect them for their own good, and on, and so now we're in that hideous strength realm. So we move from the optimism of electronic telepathy from Oath of Fealty to C.S. Lewis's that hideous strength kind of realm where they're going to correct people's thoughts for their own good, is rather horrific, straight out. And I'm actually kind of terrified the more I read into the technology I'm hoping I'm wrong. I'm hoping that there's some sort of barriers or limitations of what I'm describing. The only hopefulness was with the several patients, well, at least one, but where it wasn't just the brain shrank, but the brain shifted, so that the pressure mechanisms caused the probes to not be in the proper place to do them, but then it caused to the medical device element of it. Now those artificial neurons are firing in the wrong location and causing all sorts of other problems. But I am certain, I really hope that I'm wrong with the implications, but from what I've read and what you've described, that's horrifying.
There already are pacemakers, basically neural pacemakers for people with Parkinson's disease that aren't moving enough dopamine. They have very few dopamine neurons left, and it means that they can't move properly. They have trouble with their coordinated movement. But the dopamine pathway dopamine itself has two pathways. One of it is the movement system, and one of it is the pleasure system. And if there already are it firing, pacemakers for it firing that, how far off is that? Like, could you hack that, turn it up like a pacemaker, and suddenly they're pleasured out whenever you want? And could you get addicted to that? Would somebody sell a service to that? Doom scrolling directly into your brain, pleasure. And then, and where do we go from that? Does it get monetized? Do the companies do the wrong thing?
The science fiction that comes to my mind is the 1980s movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Total Recall. Would you like a vacation to Hawaii? I can upload that into your brain and you will remember that vacation that you never took. The ability to plant memories in a person or to erase memories from a person, you can totally manipulate the person. Just, the man that killed your father when you were 6 years old and you watched him die. Your father's still alive, but if I have the ability to plant memories, I could play you like a violin.
Credit where it's due. That's from a Phillip K. Dick story called "We Can Remember It For You Wholesale."
And then if you haven't seen the movie dark city, it kind of set the genre that you see in The Matrix and other shows along those lines. It demonstrated, it explored this concept of implanting memories and giving people certain psychic capabilities through that mechanism. It's a dark but very interesting movie.
If you're interested in this, tomorrow, our science track, the science fair is tomorrow, and I have a display where I'm talking about false memory implants and eyewitness testimony, and I'm going to plant false memories into people tomorrow. So if you want to come by that table, I'll have a bunch of.
Isn't there an ethics board that's gonna have one?
Yeah. I remember the joke. What do you get when you cross an octopus and a cow or whatever? It's a visit from the IRB and an immediate loss of funding. Science jokes. Any other, like, where, since we go down the line here, we've got these guys, what's your worst case scenario for where you think this is going? Or best case scenario for where you think this is going? And then we'll take questions.
I guess best case scenario is that it's used to change people's lives and absolutely nothing else. Worst case scenario, I think
Exactly the same.
we have the government pretty much monitoring our thoughts, prosecuting us for crimes before they occur, or for the thought of doing something, and criminalizing. Pretty much criminalizing thought. That's probably worst case scenario for me.
That's pretty terrible.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got like 15-ish minutes left. Do we want to take questions with that?
Microphone.
Yep, line up, Mike.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Cail. I'm a physicist and a neurophysicist, actually. I recently wrote a dissertation based on how playing video games can induce neuroplastic refinements in the brain and all that kind of jazz. Fun stuff. You touched on a lot of interesting points, and I actually was kind of wondering what this panel would kind of more or less how it would go and what kind of tone and discussion that would take place. And I am more optimistic that serious discussion regarding the serious implications, both the potential pros and cons of this kind of technology, are being discussed seriously. And it's important to do so. I think science is at its best. Science is supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be difficult. And progress is supposed to be difficult for a good reason. And people lose sight of that sometimes. One. And two, from the perspective of Adam Smith and on the capitalism side of things, welcoming competition among competitors to challenge and develop best practices and hold companies accountable. You don't unless you have a market, a real market. With proper oversight, you won't. This thing won't. I mean, it's kind of dead on arrival, right? Like, where's my question here? My question is, we discussed going back and forth on the pros and cons and the limitations of these things, and there's a tremendous potential as well to explore. My question is, I suppose, with all of this, is that what do you, based on your collective experience and knowledge in the field within your respective roles, do you think that perhaps are we on a right track? Are we setting a good pace for ourselves, that our sense of wisdom is keeping pace with our sense of intellectual and technological advancement? That's my question.
Personally, from the neuroscience side, we had these same concerns when we started coming out with neuroscientifically, with psychopharmaceuticals. And we started worrying, like, okay, we can alleviate some of these depression or their anxiety, but does it fundamentally change their personality? And what are the ethics of that? And yet here we are with Prozac and 15 different types of antidepressant and 42 different types of anti-anxiety medications. It was good that we wrestled with those, but it's also good we have them. But we really need to make sure we don't just let something in without wrestling with it. And here we are wrestling with it, so that's great.
Historically, the law is always dreadfully behind technology. We saw it with the internet. We've seen it. We're currently seeing it with AI. But the law is always catching up to the technology. And in this case, that could be a real big problem.
I would say as a species, our ability to predict unanticipated consequences or unintended consequences is growing linear. The speed of our technological innovation is growing exponential. I use the analogy of if I'm driving my car at night with the low beams on, I'm fine up to a certain speed. And beyond that speed, I don't have time to react when I see something in the headlights. And my biggest concern is that's where we are with this technology. The technology is growing much faster than our ability to prepare for the unintended consequences of the technology.
That's a great analogy. I
Yeah.
love that.
So going back to the Adam Smith discussion earlier, if you had completely, open market with no limitations, pretty soon you're selling human flesh in the market.
Well,
But let me just finish the discussion. And then obviously the government has to step in the proper rules to make those limitations. And as you say, it doesn't always keep up with the technology, and there are perverse incentives literally implanted in this if it goes beyond just assisting people with the quality of life. Within our society, we're at least having that discussion. My greater concern is once this technology gets to other societies that do not have this deliberative and participatory process to debate these things, in the hands of Kim Jong-un, other, actors in the world, who go, wow, I really can create the perfect police state where I can monitor people's thoughts. So yes, we need to have this deliberate discussion, but we also need to recognize that not everything is inside our control, as you are highlighting about the rate of it, and then as the technology proliferates, and the rate of proliferation or democratization of technology across the planet has caught us off guard.
Thank you. That's a great question.
No, thank you. Also, with respect to Adam Smith, I think the first book he wrote was the Theory of Moral Sentiments, which built wealth and nation value.
Yes,
Right.
that's a whole nother panel.
I probably have more statements than actual questions. I think you're absolutely correct to feel trepidation. And I think it's, especially with the present administration, we've seen what they want to do as far as AI being unfettered and their stripping of regulations. The person that owns Neuralink, we know is untrustworthy. There's that, I don't think anybody can really debate that. But the science fiction genre cyberpunk has pretty much been dealing with this for 30-something years, and these people are using it as a playbook when it was meant to be
Or cautionary tale, yeah.
Yeah.
Beyond cautionary tale to be an instruction.
we're seeing the same thing on the AI side of things, and they're going to go hand in hand.
Yeah.
I think the quality of life thing is they're using it as their end for the technology. I think they have their sights set on where the money and the control is.
Well, in a society in which the common citizens are the sovereign, then if we're going to remain a moral society, then we should approach our leaders,
Mhm.
and in voting, et cetera, to limit the use of this technology for the specific quality of life issues, and also addressing the I forget the legal term about the adhesion factors of it. And, that's the mechanism to attempt to bottle up the genie here in this society. Others,
Well, I mean, it's global. It's not confined here. Like you guys mentioned rendition. If they're, sending people to Uganda, what is stopping them from doing all the research in Uganda instead of in the United States. I just really feel like, what's the word or the term? We've passed the point of no return. I think we've already started down the path, and unless things really change drastically, that it's coming, how do we deal with it?
I think
I mean, it's gonna be, people are just they're not gonna read the terms of service. They're just gonna, oh, I can have the internet in my head.
Thank you.
Hello, I have two questions. One's quicker, and I'll probably just stick to that one for brevity, but, oops, okay. The quicker one, is just kind of more the pessimistic one, but as I believe Phillip was talking about, there was an idea floating around where do you draw the line of what can and can't be done? As generic as that sounds, sort of the idea I had in my head was, let's say some patient loses a limb, a company gives back that limb, either Neuralink or prosthetic, and it's like almost perfect or pretty much perfect. And then the company is, oh, hey, bankrupt, or say, oh, I need more funding. And they're like, oh, we're gonna stop. You're not gonna have your arm anymore unless you give us $10 a month or something like that. I guess that's sort of to follow on with what Phillip was saying. How do you guys seeing that play out, or is that where you draw the line? I'm guessing this is more of a legal question too.
I see that eventually, we already have a very complicated healthcare system, but I see that kind of going the way of utility companies. Governments, or our government heavily influences what, utility companies say, oh, you can't just decide what to charge for water. We're not going to let you do that. Especially in most areas where only one company is regulating something so essential to life. And I'd argue that, my right arm is essential to life.
Right.
And so in an ideal world, there would be a lot of, I guess, I hesitate to say positive government interference, but I think that that's what we need. Kind of like what Phillip is saying, and is that getting on the front end of this would be very important to say, listen, you can't sell someone a monthly subscription for an arm.
Right.
That's something that, needs to be protected. Again, people are desperate. People will do whatever it takes. And historically, the more the desperation, the more a grain of salt courts will look at, and, oh, this person just was willing to do anything because it gives them their life back.
Right.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate off of that for a moment, though. The issue with monopolies and monopsonies is you then reduce incentive for invention.
Yep.
So if you turn these into essentially utilities, utilities are notorious for not doing investments and advancement in their services because they have no incentive to do so. And so a similar kind of situation arises in the biomedical and other realms. If you don't protect the patent and give the inventor the ability to make a profit off of it, then they have less incentive to improve the product. Which goes back to the discussion earlier, the Adam Smith discussion about you have to have some mechanism for competition if you want, but competition means there's some sort of compensation for the investment being made. So yeah, we're going to be wrestling with all that for quite some time.
We only have a few minutes left, so we'll do quick. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll second that. Thank you.
Hey, sorry, quick question. So I'm coming from more of a medical perspective as a physician. I'm more so directed to Jessica. So it makes sense that this machine can help with motor movement because you're firing one part of the brain, it moves a motor.
Yep.
It makes sense how you can also do emotion of like, okay, you want dopamine, that makes you happy.
Yeah.
However, I'm curious from a psycho history, what about thought? I don't really know from a medical standpoint, how can we actually measure thought Right.
One of the
So-
only bright spots I can see in all of this is that
So
that
far.
we can't, yeah, one of the only bright spots I've got is that thought is so complicated, we don't even know how it
Right.
works. So the government could not, in theory, plant one in us. They
Right.
can make us feel big picture things, but the implants don't have the resolution to
Mhm.
puppet us perfectly, maybe
Right.
move an arm or a leg, but they don't have that kind of resolution. And they certainly don't have the wherewithal to be able to figure out that firing this, then this, then this, and this equals
Then
like assassinating the president or
Right.
something. Yeah, so, but will they figure it out eventually with functional MRIs and just light up this part, this part, this part, and this part, and suddenly somebody has a feel,
Yeah.
has a feeling about something and they're angry and it's this person.
So,
and-
so when I made that statement, I was drawing a line, where there's some dotted material between about when reading about how the closest of how your motor functions to speak to make up a lot sentence
Mhm.
is close in the brain to the mechanisms of how you generate thought.
Mhm.
Whether or not this technology can reach that element in the brain, I have no idea. But if it can, that is terrifying.
Implanted snow crash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They-
What the other company said it's doing wireless?
Yes, Stentrode, it is doing it wirelessly, but it's just not, it's almost the exact same way, but the implants aren't going by brain surgery and they're
Right.
going up through the artery and adjacent measurements. So then it could be removed, it's not damaging any brain tissue, you don't have to worry about retraction or anything like that. And they've got FDA approval because they're piggybacking on a technology that already existed and has been proven safe and effective.
Now, that's less intrusive, but it's also not closer to the actual neurons in the brain.
Even lower resolution, so maybe ethically we're happier about Stentrode than we are about Neuralink for a bunch of reasons.
You already do craniotomies though, like how's that different? Like craniotomies are FDA approved, you can do craniotomy.
Where they remove half, like a,
Yeah, you
like a
can
hemisphere.
do a vein in like,
Yeah.
what's the difference between going into the vein, like putting in like electrode there?
Because it's not going into the brain, the electrode stays in the
The
artery and measures through the wall of the artery, so it doesn't actually go into the brain. So nothing put in, nothing removed, it's just adjacent, sort of just like parking your car outside of a Starbucks so that you can use their Wi-Fi.
So you're closer to the neurons,
You're close to the neurons, but you're not in
but not
them.
inside. whereas
So
the other mechanism-
Neuralink will always get better resolution
Yeah.
because they can put more implants in there and they're just sort of measuring, Stentrode's measuring adjacent.
The intrusiveness versus
Yeah.
resolution
Yeah, that.
trade-off.
Okay, we only have a few minutes left. Let's go.
Oh, as sometimes happens, she actually took half my question.
Oh,
But so
that's great.
I guess we
That's
understand the
fantastic.
output as far as motor, that makes a lot of sense, but y'all talking, because some of the, y'all are speculative authors about reading our thoughts, we understand, I like the analogy of you could measure our response to brunette, blonde, red. So you could do that a number of ways, getting my hormones, getting other physiological reactions, but how close can you get to thought or transcribing the internal monologue? What would that take? Can that be done? I know that's not now, but
Like I
you
said,
say something like thought reading.
I just drew
Yeah.
the line from two pieces that I was reading in preparation for this about the
Since people,
closeness of the brain of when you read and think of what you speak is close to how you think. But the whether or not you can reach that part of the brain, I don't know. I took these two different elements and drew a line between them. But I do it for a living. But now I'm asking the scientists, how close are we to that? Because that's rather horrifying.
We're
Yeah.
kind of close. I'm going to give you an example. They put people in a brain scanner and they had people who had really experienced a crime and people who had only heard about the crime and hadn't really experienced it. They'd read it. And when they looked in the brain of a person who had seen the crime and heard the crime, all the parts of the senses, parts of the brain lit up. Like he heard the gunshot and he saw this and he felt this. But the person who had only read it or thought it, his other parts, his emotional areas lit up and stuff, but the actual auditory areas didn't light up because he never heard anything. He thought about hearing something.
we've also heard that some people apparently don't have an internal monologue, which
Yeah,
I do
I can
can't
understand
imagine.
that. Like running, I have a run.
So they exempt.
So yes, we're close to the point where we can recognize a real thought from a big thought. A real thought from an implanted thought.
Hello. Who owns Neuralink?
Elon Musk is the owner, but not the CEO. So I guess he's not running it. They've kind of distanced that, but
Okay.
yeah. So
Okay.
it's basically running.
That's the guy that, he donated like $250 million to the Republican campaign, leading a president.
Was offering $1 million.
The guy that like ran Doge and had his hands on the levers of our government, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess, Phillip, my question to you is, we're twisting ourselves in pretzels trying to think of the dark side of Neuralink. And you guys made it through an entire panel without mentioning his name.
Well, that's,
Like,
that's actually a feature
let
not
me finish. I will just like let you guys finish like right after. Cory, like legally, like the judiciary is getting like trampled on right now, right? Like they are ignoring the courts. And from a science perspective, they're trampling on science too. They're dismantling it. So I think like you guys are just like, I so respect all of your expertise, but like, I just kind of sat through this for an hour and I just feel like we're all asleep at the wheel here. Like we're not actually discussing like.
Well, don't
The
confuse
truth-
the fact that the panel is about Neuralink. We're talking about Neuralink. Don't think that because we're talking about Neuralink, we aren't considering all those other things. Just because something is about a thing doesn't mean it isn't. We aren't aware of the other things, but we could also make this about
So
Burger
that would-
King, and we didn't talk about Burger King. Doesn't mean we're not aware of it.
One of the most important things to talk about.
No, I think we're talking about the science of this particular thing and the science fiction applications at a sci-fi convention.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
So
the, I
you
think
could go
like
to a
the most
politics
magnet-
convention and I agree with you,
yeah.
but just because this isn't about that doesn't mean we aren't just as concerned about that, but the panel is about Neuralink and so we're talking about Neuralink.
limiting to the topic is a feature, not a bug.
Yes.
This panel.
And it's not by our negligence, it's just like we're just staying on topic because we have an hour and we're already up
Right.
and
I do.
we could have talked
respect
forever.
all- Yeah, I absolutely respect all of the
I agree
fields
with
so
you what you're
much.
saying. Would you
And
have the
that's
panel?
why I'm up here is because I do actually respect all of those fields, but I respectfully, I think it's very weird to like not utter his name the entire time.
We did once.
We also all have been talking about this, how much caution we should take with this product already. Throwing his name into it, I would just, it would be redundant almost.
Respectfully, I think that's part of the problem and why we're getting trampled on.
Well, you know, there are other elements of participation in our politics that should take that out.
Yeah. Okay. Yep, we'll take one more. Okay, before he goes, let me just remind you that, please rate this panel if you liked it, if you didn't, if you agreed with it, if you didn't disagree with it. Determine what rooms we get, how big the rooms are, how small the rooms are. So please rate us in the app so that people know whether, how it went down. Okay, go for it.
I wanted to follow up on something I believe Cory said, about how, you can't sell someone a monthly subscription to use their arm.
You shouldn't be able to.
Okay, shouldn't be able to. It seems to me that it's worth drawing a distinction between legally allowed to and physically capable of.
Yeah.
Because if you forbid it from being done, but if you forbid it from being done, there's no saying that a future administration or Congress could repeal that. So if the company has even the capability of turning off your right arm, you always have to live in fear that some future political situation might turn that capability into actuality. So how would you go about preventing that outcome?
Probably an amendment to the Constitution. That would be the most difficult thing to overturn in our federal government. Just from a logistics standpoint, it takes X number of states. The next administration wouldn't be able to just write away a constitution or an amendment to the Constitution, but an amendment defining what privacy rights we have with thoughts or with our brains and this sort of thing. That would be the most difficult thing. There's nothing to say that, the four of us don't start an uprising and just overturn the United States tomorrow. very unlikely, but there's always that possibility. So an amendment to the Constitution would be the most difficult thing to undo.
I'll leave one little other bright spot on this, other than the fact that we don't have the resolution or the ability to implant a full-on thought yet, is that I imagine that liberal or conservative, this kind of privacy invasion will hit both parties quite hard, and they will be many people that are against the idea of anybody being able to implant a thought. So I think that there would be a surprising consensus.
The 13th Amendment, specifically about due process, the procedural due process that was invested, particularly in the legal theory grew in the 1970s about the procedural due process and the shock to conscience specific language in the development of that is I think a pretty strong underpinning to protecting those rights, but you still have to remain vigilant, right? Constant vigilance. Yeah, constant vigilance is the price of freedom. Yeah, so and as we expand the technology, which questions who we are as a race, then all the more reason for us to participate in our democracy.
Yeah. Thank you.